Hey guys, tonight we slip back into time, not through dusty scrolls or grainy black and white reconstructions, but through the hush of silk against skin, through the barely audible murmur of two lovers breathing secrets into each other's mouths as if the world might split open if anyone else heard. It's the Tang Dynasty. And you're not an emperor or a general, not tonight. You're something far more dangerous. You're the one they whisper to in the dark. Outside, Chang'an snores. It's the 8th century, and this is the largest, most cosmopolitan city the world has ever seen. Paper lanterns sway in the midnight breeze like they're eavesdropping on the secrets passed below. You tread barefoot on cold stone floors, your silk slippers in hand, because even the softest footfall could betray you. You're not supposed to be here. The corridors of the palace are a web, and you're the spider's dinner. Every torch flicker throws long shadows of sleeping eunuchs and guards who have been trained to kill dreams for a living. But you glide, smooth, determined, drawn by the scent of magnolia and ambergris, drawn to a door half ajar, where perfume dances with candlelight and the future hangs by a whisper. Inside, she waits. Or maybe he, or maybe it's a they. Doesn't matter. What matters is what's about to pass between your lips, not the flesh. Not the touch, but the words. The ones they'll quote in the courtroom as bygone. The ones that can cradle or collapse dynasties. Because in the Tang Dynasty, sex was political. But pillow talk, that was practically warfare with scented breath. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time too, so I can see where all my night owls and time travelers are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The bedchamber is low lit. Curtains hang like the inside of an orchid, heavy with crimson embroidery. The air, sweet and spicy, a blend of peony, musk, and secrets too old to name. Silk sheets rustle like gossip in the imperial court. And the voice hers, theirs, his it, doesn't say hello. It says, "Did you miss me, even in your dreams?" And just like that, you're back in a time where conversation didn't end with climax, it began there. You lie on your side, tracing the contour of someone's collarbone, as if you're writing poetry with your finger. Because you are. Pillow talk in the Tang was an idle chat. It was an art, taught, refined, and wielded like a jeweled dagger. The right whisper could get you promoted, the wrong one, exiled. Sometimes dead. Sometimes worse, forgotten. In a world where concubines could quote Dufu better than generals could wield a sword, and where emperors wept into the lap of someone who'd mastered the 3 tones of erotic sincerity, the stakes of pillow talk weren't just emotional, they were geopolitical. Now, it's easy to think of ancient Chinese bedrooms as hushed, shame-laced places, but that's modern projection. Tang bedrooms were loud with poetry, heavy with meaning, and occasionally, hilarious. Like one Tang noblewoman famously ended an argument mid-pillow talk by farting deliberately. Not even subtly, just weaponized flatulence. Her partner, a noted scholar, reportedly responded by writing a 5-line poem praising the harmony of wind and will. But not every bedchamber was so democratic. You're in one now that drips power. The carved headboard tells stories. Dragons chasing phoenixes, lovers folding into lotus blossoms, warriors kissing death under moonlight. The silk pillow beneath your head is stitched with phrases in seal script. One reads, "Words carry weight." Another, "Whispers outlive kingdoms." And here's the thing, they weren't wrong. Because that time you laughed too freely, someone's listening. The maid who changed the sheets, her ears don't miss a syllable. That eunuch who lights the incense, he's memorizing your side of the conversation for a future report. Even silence, in this world, is a language. It says, "I don't trust you." Or worse, I've already betrayed you, and yet people spoke. Lovers poured truths into one another, not despite thee. Danger, but because of it. One night, a mid-level consort reportedly asked her visiting prince if he'd still love her once her beauty faded. He answered with a metaphor. If the moon forgets the sky, it still drags the tide. Sweet, right? Problem was, she told another consort, who told the empress, who decided metaphors were too good for anyone not royal. The prince got reassigned to the western provinces. Nothing but sand and regret. Historians still argue whether Tang pillow talk was truly romantic, or just another stage in the performance of courtly life. But if you listen closer than a hairpin against lacquer, you'll hear something human behind all the artifice. The longing to be known, the thrill of being understood. The gamble of vulnerability, paid out in strokes of the tongue instead of the brush. You lean in closer. The body beside you shifts, sheets whispering secrets in their own language. Fingers draw circles on your wrist. There's something they want to say, but they wait deliberately, cruelly, because timing is everything. And just as you open your mouth to respond, a thought flits across your mind like a bat through candlelight. What if these words outlive us? What if they become history? You wouldn't be alone in wondering that. The Tang elite were obsessed with legacy, poetic, erotic, political. They composed couplets mid-foreplay, debated Buddhism versus Taoism while tangled in limbs, and treated every whispered confession like it might be engraved on jade one day. And sometimes it was. Bamboo scrolls discovered in ancient latrines have turned up all sorts of pillow banter love poems, erotic riddles, even jokes about imperial performance. Anxiety. No one was safe from satire, not even the son of heaven. And maybe that's the secret. Maybe the Tang didn't take sex as seriously as we think. Maybe it wasn't about dominance or submission, pleasure or procreation, but about presence. About the moment when two people, cloaked in silk and expectation, drop the act for just long enough to say, "This is who I am," when no one's watching. And then the curtain rustles, someone's coming. The whispering stops. You slip your hand beneath the pillow, not for a weapon, but for the letter you hid there earlier. Not love, not poetry, just a name. One you're not supposed to know. And just like that, the temperature changes. The candle burns lower, the night stretches on. And you realize, pillow talk in the Tang Dynasty wasn't just foreplay. It was prophecy. You don't speak first. That would be a mistake. Because in a Tang Dynasty bedchamber, words carry weight. The way jade carries history, cool, smooth, but deadly if dropped. You wait, letting the silence stretch just long enough to show you understand its texture. Not all silences are equal. Some invite confession. Others dare you to lie. This one? It's calculating, full of scented smoke and slow blinks. Then, finally, a voice breaks it low, amused, like a cat batting at the edge of your sanity. You're late, but not too late. You exhale, not relief, but recognition. Because this is the game, and you're still in it. Welcome to the Pillow Talk Protocols. You didn't think they just rolled over and chatted about the weather, did you? No. This is courtship as strategy, seduction as warfare, with verbal sparring more dangerous than any blade. You shift your weight on the lacquered bed, careful not to wrinkle the embroidery. This design took 3 months to stitch and depicts two cranes mating in mid-air, a subtle suggestion that flight and sex are not mutually exclusive. Your fingers find the silk rope that once tied your robes. You toy with it. You're not trying to undress, just communicate. Everything here is symbolic. You wrap the rope around your wrist loosely, implying vulnerability. You let it drag between your fingers, suggesting control, and the other person sees it. Smiles slowly. Their eyes narrow not in suspicion, but in delight. They like a challenge. In the Tang Dynasty, pillow talk wasn't just idle gossip or sweet nothings whispered between moans. It was a fully codified ritual, with unwritten rules more intricate than any Confucian text. It wasn't about speaking. It was about knowing when not to. You had to master tone, pacing, metaphor. Directness was frowned upon. If you wanted to say, "I desire you," you said, "The moon tonight makes even the plum blossoms shiver." If you wanted to ask about another lover, you asked, "Do the clouds visit other mountains before they return to mine?" Failure. To play along didn't just ruin the mood, it revealed your class, your lack of polish. In Chang'an, even lust had a literacy requirement. Aristocrats trained for this. Literally, young nobles were taught pillow culture as part of their grooming for marriage, diplomacy, and even espionage. There were entire handbooks, now mostly lost, that instructed readers on how to phrase a request for sex as a poetic compliment, how to deny an invitation with grace, how to use voice inflection to suggest infidelity without accusing it outright. One manual, rumored to have been penned by an imperial concubine, advised, "Let your yes mean yes only when spoken in the tone of no." Historians still argue whether this text was widely circulated or just an urban legend, but its influence is undeniable. The entire city became fluent in implication. Even commoners mimicked the elite, imitating the flowery speech patterns of the nobility during their own trysts. There's a recorded case of a fishmonger from the outer markets who wooed a merchant's daughter by comparing her sweat to lotus dew. It worked. She eloped with him that night. She also contracted lice, but that's another tale. Tonight your opponent or lover, or both, is more practiced. They ask you, "Did the stars look different on your way here?" And you know they're really asking, "Were you with someone else?" You counter with, "Only the constellations I've memorized," which translates to, "Only the ones I've named after you." You're rewarded with a slow reach toward your chest, not to disrobe you, but to feel the beat of your heart. It's not affection, it's confirmation. They're checking if your pulse gives you away, and this is where it gets dangerous. Because beneath the poetry, the metaphors, the theatrical phrasing, real secrets sometimes get said. In a society where nearly everyone is surveilled, where even the sheets might have ears sewn into the silk, pillow talk became the last free space to speak truths. Many Tang Dynasty scandals were born in bed. One concubine, famed for her linguistic games, once lured a prince into admitting he planned to forge a decree. He confessed, thinking her lips were loyal. They weren't. She whispered his words into the empress's ear by morning. He was arrested before he finished breakfast. Another tale, more erotic, less tragic, tells of a court musician who seduced a visiting Persian diplomat through nothing but wordplay. They spent 3 nights together, never touching below the neck, speaking only in improvised couplets. On the 4th night, the diplomat proposed. She declined. She already had what she wanted, his political secrets, neatly tucked between rhymes. Pillow talk, it turns out, wasn't just an art, it was a weapon. A way to seduce without surrender. To dominate without raising a hand. Courtesans were the true masters of it. Trained not just in lute and calligraphy, but in conversation. Some were so skilled that clients came not for sex, but for the experience of being truly heard. One elite courtesan, known in surviving texts only as Lady Ming, could reduce men to tears with a single whispered line. One story claims she once told a warlord, "Your sword is sharp, but your loneliness is sharper," and he paid her the equivalent of a small kingdom to say it again, just once. She did. Then she never spoke to him again. That, of course, drove him mad. You wonder what she'd say to you. Something brutal? Something kind? Maybe both. The person in your bed now tilts their head and says, "Some say dreams are memories from lives we've yet to live." That's not a line you forget. You wonder if they practiced it, or if somehow it's just true. And here's your fringe tidbit of the night. Tang pillows weren't always soft. In fact, many elites preferred porcelain or jade pillows, often cooled before use. They believed a warm head clouded judgment, and that coolness brought clarity. Which means that even during sex, people were lying on literal stone-cold logic. You try not to laugh. Imagine whispering a confession while getting a crick in your neck from a ceramic brick painted with cranes. Romance has always had its uncomfortable realities, but back to the conversation. Because even as fingers tangle and lips hover close, the real intimacy is still happening in your words. And the question hanging in the air now is, do you trust them? Enough to tell them something no one else knows? Enough to speak, not the poetic version, but the raw truth? Maybe, but first you reach for metaphor. If I told you my heart, would you water it or drown it? That's the Tang way. Wrap the blade in silk before you hand it over. The response comes slow, deliberate, and devastating. That depends. Is it a garden ... or a floodplain? You inhale sharp. That's good. That's really good. And for a second, you forget that the walls have ears. You forget that in the morning, one of you might vanish. You forget the politics, the protocol, the porcelain pillows. There's just this moment, stretched like silk across the night, where everything is said and unsaid at once. And you realize this isn't foreplay, this is the main act. Words, carefully chosen, dangerously exchanged, are the real climax. Everything else? Just punctuation. You don't notice the fan at first. It's folded, tucked beside your companions, hip like a lazy afterthought. But as they shift, turning slightly to face you with that half-lidded Tang indifference that could mean either affection or assassination, the fan comes to life. Just a flick of the wrist, sharp, deliberate, and it opens with a whisper. Not the rustle of paper, but of silk, because in the Tang Dynasty, even fans were decadent. Painted on one side, a garden of plum blossoms shivering in moonlight. On the other, a tiger curled in bamboo. The symbolism isn't lost on you. Vulnerability on one side, power on the other. And now it's moving. Not randomly, deliberately. You watch the rhythm, 3 slow wafts, followed by a sudden snapshot, and you realize something. They're not cooling themselves. They're speaking. You've just stepped into the strange, silent language of fans. Pillow talk wasn't always verbal. In a society where entire conversations could be surveilled by nosy maids, eunuchs with photographic memories, and frankly, curtains thin enough to betray sound, Tang lovers developed an alternative, coded gestures with fans. These weren't just flirty gimmicks. They were serious, practiced, and loaded with meaning. A fan held just below the chin meant interest. One touch to the lips, a promise. If it was tapped twice on the left palm, disappointment. Angled outward while closed, a gentle rejection. Fan language was, in essence, an emotional Morse code for people too smart or too politically entangled to say what they meant aloud. And you're now a participant. Your lover slides the fan across the bed toward you, the painted tiger. Side up, you're expected to respond. You don't panic. Instead, you remember the gossip from the bathhouse earlier that week. A courtesan in the West Market supposedly taught fan talk to half the bureaucrats in the city, turning lovers into silent poets. Her motto, say nothing, mean everything. So you take the fan, rest it on your own chest, tag her up again, and then slowly rotate it to plum blossoms before placing it back. Translation, I'm not a threat, but I could be. That earns a smirk. You're getting the hang of it. The game is evolving. They move closer now, letting their hair fall like a velvet curtain between you and the rest of the universe. The scent is floral, yes, but also fermented, a sign of plum wine recently sipped. Their mouth is near your ear. You know, they murmur, a fan once started a war. Not a metaphor, a historical fact delivered like gossip. And now you're intrigued. You nod, inviting the story. Emperor Chang'an had a favorite concubine, Lady Wu, who fancied herself a bit of a playwright. One night, She used her fan to write a teasing verse on the emperor's arm. Nothing scandalous, but the empress saw. She mistook it for a secret message, accused her of treason by seduction. By dawn, Lady Wu was dead, and the emperor executed 3 servants for bringing him the wrong kind of ink. You whistle low. In the Tang court, even flirtation could get you beheaded, and yet they kept flirting. Maybe it was the danger that made it irresistible. Because let's be honest, there's something wildly seductive about silent communication. In a world obsessed with noise, think about it. Today we overshare. We text, we DM, we thirst trap. But in the Tang Dynasty, a flick of a fan could mean, I want you, or I'm betraying you. A world where people train themselves to read subtext, not scream subtext. Refreshing, right? You shift your weight again, careful not to disturb the arrangement of pillows behind you. One of them, a square one embroidered with cranes, is noticeably firmer. You lean against it, then realize why. Inside is something solid. You glance at your companion. They don't stop you. You reach in slowly and pull out a letter. Not sealed, handwritten. A poem, perhaps. You begin to read. When I sleep, I dream of your breath on my name. When I wake, I find the pillow. Colder than truth. A sigh escapes you. This isn't just romantic fluff. It's a lament. A fan might whisper desire, but a letter? That was grief, loss, hope. And here's your required sex story of the night, pulled straight from the annals of tangled history. There was a General Li Zun famous not just for his military tactics, but for a rather specific sexual quirk. He only slept with people who could beat him at fan charades. No joke. He believed verbal foreplay was a test of mind and physical. Pleasure was a reward for intellectual domination. One lover, a merchant's son disguised as a tea seller, allegedly wooed him over 4 nights without ever speaking. Just flicks of a fan and subtle changes in posture. On the 5th night, they finally touched. On the 6th, Li Zun tried to marry him. On the 7th, the boy vanished. Historians still argue whether he was a spy, a thief, or just smarter than Li Zun wanted to admit. Some say the general spent his last days talking to a fan painted with cherry blossoms, waiting for someone who would never respond. So yeah, don't underestimate the power of a prop. Your companion taps your knee now gently and gestures toward the open window. You both rise, barefoot, and step toward it. Below, the city of Chang'an twinkles like a spilled jewelry box. Somewhere out there, another pair of lovers is whispering secrets into linen. Somewhere else, someone is dying for saying the wrong thing to the wrong person. You lean against the sill. They brush your hand. Do you think, they ask, that anyone will remember this moment? You don't answer right away. Instead, you close the fan again, let it rest between you, and say, only if we lie about it in verse. It's a joke, but also not. Because in this world, memory is performance. Truth is poetic license. And what happens here, beneath the fan's shadow, between the folds of silk and suggestion, might never be written down. But it will echo, somewhere, maybe even centuries from now, on a night like this, when someone walks barefoot across a cold floor and listens, really listens to the silence. That silence might just be you. You wake up before the sun does. Not from discomfort, Tang bedding is exquisite, after all, but from the sense that something's changed in the room. The candles are still burning low, the silk sheets tangled around your limbs like lazy snakes, but your companion is sitting upright, already dressed, hair pinned with jade, looking out the lattice window as if they've been watching the night dissolve for hours, and in their lap, a scroll, tied with red cord, sealed with wax. You know better than to ask what's in it, but they notice your glance and smile without turning. Love letters, they say, but not mine. I collect them. Of course they do. You sit up, pulling the sheet with you, like armor. From whom? They finally look at you, whoever left their words behind. That's your cue. You stretch, roll your shoulders, and mentally shift gears. We're in the age of erotic. Calligraphy and midnight letters, remember? In the Tang Dynasty, love wasn't just felt, it was inked. With ink made of burnt orchid root or crushed pearls, on paper soft enough to blush, people poured their passions into characters so beautiful, the script alone could make someone weep. Calligraphy was a sexual act in itself. The brush dipped, stroked, curved across silk, every movement mirrored a body in ecstasy. And the content? Let's just say the Tang elite were not subtle. One letter, uncovered in a noble woman's tomb, included the line, "Your absence dries me like the Yangtze in drought." Another, "If your mouth does not touch mine, I will float away, untethered into the stars." And still another, written by a male scholar to his traveling lover. "Even the ink of this letter is jealous, for it touches the paper more intimately than I touch your skin." Cheesy? Sure. But don't pretend that if someone sent you that on a Tuesday morning, you wouldn't melt. These letters weren't mere decoration, they were currency. A well-turned phrase could get you promoted, invited, protected. Sometimes, it got you killed. You flick your gaze to the scroll in their lap. "Is that real?" They raise an eyebrow. "What do you think?" You reach for it. They let you untie it slowly, dramatically, like unbracing a ghost. The paper is old. Not ancient, but not fresh either. The characters flow like water, each one sliding into the next with intimate confidence. "Last night, your voice folded me like silk," it begins, and you know immediately this was written in bed, possibly on a lover's back, possibly using a fingertip dipped in wine before it was ever transcribed in ink. Some Tang couples did that, you know. Practiced their poems on each other's bodies before committing them to scroll. Erotic calligraphy wasn't just for show, it was foreplay. And not the rushed kind. No. This was the, "I've got all night and a second brush for your thigh" kind. It wasn't unusual for lovers to write each other during the act, not stopping. To pause the pleasure, but layering the experiences, physical and poetic, at the same time. One famous courtesan reportedly kept a table beside her bed just for this, and would stop mid-encounter to jot down a haiku that came to her in the moment. The men loved it. Some even came just from hearing her recite. You read further down the scroll. It's unsigned, of course. Tang letters almost always were. Anonymity was safer and more seductive. Anyone could have written this. A court lady to a eunuch, a scholar to his rival, a monk to a passing traveler. One of the most famous love letters from the period was discovered inside the wall of an abandoned temple, addressed only to "the one who warmed the tea and my heart in equal measure." Historians still argue whether the writer was male or female, whether the recipient was real or imagined. What's not debated? The line that reads, "Even the gods, I suspect, eavesdrop when you say my name." Your companion watches your face. As you read, you know they're studying your reactions. Maybe this is a test. Maybe the scroll isn't from the past at all. Maybe they wrote it last night, and this is their game. You don't ask. That would break the spell. Instead, you ask to keep it. They smile and shake their head. Only if you write one in return. Of course, reciprocity was sacred in the art of Tang letter writing. A letter unanswered was a slap in the face. Lovers were expected to match. Intensity, imagery, emotional tone. If someone sent you a metaphor about drowning in desire, you damn well better respond with something about setting rivers on fire. And if you couldn't, you hired someone. Ghostwriting love letters was a thriving business in Chang'an. Entire stalls in the market specialized in selling pre-written erotic poems. The best ones were expensive and recognizable by signature phrases like, "Bamboo shivers in your absence," or "My soul walks barefoot through your silence." One scholar even claimed that over half of the romantic correspondence in the Candlelight imperial court was plagiarized. That didn't make it less meaningful, just more poetic. The trick was not in being original, but in being precise. Saying exactly what your lover needed to hear, in the voice they wanted to hear it. One evening, a young nobleman tried to impress his concubine with a scroll filled with steamy verse about her body resembling a ripe lychee. She reportedly laughed so hard she fell out of bed. "Try again," she said, "when your metaphors don't sound like market day." The next night, he came back with a simple line. "My breath forgets itself in your sigh." She married him a week later. Sometimes less was more. Sometimes restraint was sexier than excess. You glance at the inkstone on the bedside table. Still wet. Your companion knew you'd want to respond. You rise slowly, letting the silk slip down your shoulders like fog, and sit at the low writing desk. The brush feels heavy, intimate, like a loaded promise. You dip it, wait, then write. "If this night were ink, I would never lift the brush." You don't sign it, you don't have to. You leave it face up and return to bed. They don't read it. Not yet. Just smile, satisfied. "You're learning," they whisper. And you are. You're learning that in the Tang Dynasty, intimacy wasn't rushed. That words were limbs. That calligraphy was conversation. That pillow talk didn't end with sleep, but unfolded into the day as memory, as anticipation, as record. You're learning that letters mattered because they lasted. In a world without voice memos or emojis, they were the closest thing to forever. And sometimes forever was just long enough to fall in love. Someone's moaning in the walls. You freeze not in fear, but curiosity. It's faint, stretched thin across the architecture like perfume drifting through rice paper. A low, rhythmic sound, half laugh, half plea, pulsing from the suite next door. But it isn't just the noise that grips you, it's the timing. 3 short sighs, then silence. Then a whisper, repeated like a prayer. Not a name, a title. Your Majesty. The voice is raw silk frayed at the edges, lush in the middle, and suddenly you realize you're not just hearing a lover. You're eavesdropping on the empire's most intimate political theater. Welcome to the bed of Emperors Xuanzang and Yang Gaifei. This is where policy is moaned into existence, and kingdoms are lost beneath embroidered pillows. You press your ear against the cool lacquered panel, pretending not to. You know you shouldn't be here. But you also know that everything worth knowing in the Tang Dynasty was whispered after dark and denied by morning. The power of pillow talk wasn't limited to poets and courtesan. It sat at the heart of the empire, curled beside a man whose decisions were shaped by one woman's breath on his neck. Yang Gaifei wasn't just beautiful, she was a phenomenon. Poets compared her to the moon. Artists tried to capture the slope of her cheekbone. Diplomats bowed lower to her than to the chancellor. But what made her dangerous wasn't her body, it was her voice. Low, musical, always just shy of revealing too much. When she spoke to Xuanzang, entire provinces held their breath. Because he listened, and he obeyed. They say she once whispered a single name, Lo Shen, while draped across the emperor's chest. And by morning, that man had command of the northern armies. Historians still argue whether it was seduction or strategy, whether she loved Lushan or just needed him. But what's agreed upon is this: without that whisper, the Lushan rebellion might never have ignited. Which means a sigh in bed turned into a civil war. That's how volatile the sheets were in the Tang court. But let's rewind a little. Xuanzang didn't always love Yang Gaifei. He inherited her, in a way. She was originally married to his son. Awkward, yes. Forbidden, technically. But when the emperor laid eyes on her during a court ceremony, his breath caught and so did his sense. He demanded she become a Taoist nun for a year, just long enough for public decency to forget her marriage. Then he summoned her back to court, not as daughter-in-law, but as his precious consort. And with her arrival, the court changed. Suddenly, musicians played slower, poets wrote softer, incense burned longer, and in the emperor's chambers, strategy unfolded not on scrolls, but on skin. They bathed together, ate together, slept wrapped in yards of perfumed silk so fine it was rumored to be invisible under moonlight. And as he lay beside her, post-feast and flushed with wine, she spoke. Not sweet nothings, not coos of loyalty, but questions, observations, carefully placed opinions about governors, border skirmishes, trade routes, all wrapped in lullabies. A flirtation. She never gave orders. She simply asked, "Isn't Governor Zhao growing ambitious?" Or, "Wouldn't General Lin feel more loyal if his son were granted a title?" Xuanzang, drunk on beauty and hunger and something deeper, maybe. Awe nodded, and the next day, edicts were issued. Wars postponed, promotions granted, lives changed, all from the intimacy of a pillow's edge. And yet, history has tried to reduce her to cliché, the seductive woman who ruined a nation. But that's lazy storytelling. The truth is sharper. She understood the most dangerous truth of all that. The real court was not in the throne room. It was in the bedroom. And that's not unique to China. Kings, emperors, sultans, many of them ruled the world by day and gave it away by night. But what made Xuanzang and Yang Guifei exceptional was how conscious they were of this fact. They weren't victims of passion. They were collaborators in a private theater of power. Their bed wasn't a sanctuary. It was a stage. And everyone else in the empire? Just waiting for the next act. Now back to you. You slide away from the wall, heart pounding with voyeuristic adrenaline. Not because you're scandalized, but because you understand. You've been in a room like that. Not with emperors or consorts, maybe, but with someone whose words made you feel rearranged. Who could change your entire mood, your opinion, your life with a few syllables murmured against your ear? That's the thing with pillow talk. It isn't always sexual. Sometimes it's strategic. Sometimes it's spiritual. And sometimes it's just a way of reminding someone that you see them completely when they're most unguarded. Of course, that vulnerability cuts both ways. The same lips that build you up can dismantle you. The same voice that moans your name can speak it as a curse. And in the case of Xuanzang and Yang Guifei, that's exactly what happened. Because when the Enlishan rebellion broke out, and the empire began to crumble under its own decadence, the whispers turned on her. She empowered him, the court said. She weakened the emperor. The soldiers, hungry and angry and exhausted, demanded her death as the price of loyalty. And so, on a narrow mountain pass while fleeing the capital, Xuanzang gave the order. She was strangled with a silk cord while the emperor wept into his sleeves. He mourned her for the rest of his life, but the court didn't care. They'd already moved on. That's the danger of being the voice behind the throne. You're only as powerful as the pleasure you give. When that fades, so does everything else. But she lives on in poems, in paintings, and if you believe the right rumors, in secret. Descendants who inherited not her face, but her gift of persuasion. Somewhere in Chang'an, someone is still whispering exactly the right thing into exactly the right ear. And they have no army, just a pillow. You climb back into your bed. Image of her lingering like perfume in the folds of your robe. You wonder what she would have whispered to you, had you been worthy of her attention. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. Maybe she'd say, "Power isn't in what you say, it's in what they do after you say it." You close your eyes not to sleep, but to imagine her voice, not in your ear, but in your bones. And you understand why empires rise and fall not from treaties or battles, but from words exchanged in the dark. You're holding a fan again, but this time, it's not about flirtation. Not tonight. This fan white silk stretched tight across fine bone slats carries words inked hastily in the dark, names, locations, secrets. It's a map folded in metaphor. And the person who passed it to you wasn't trying to seduce you. They were recruiting you. Pillow talk, it turns out, wasn't just for lovers. In the Tang Dynasty, it was diplomatic currency, an underground language used by spies, emissaries, rivals, and hopefuls, all trying to reshape the court through softness instead of steel. You glance around the tea house's upper level, where curtains hang low and servants pretend not to notice anything. The man beside you, not a lover, but an agent of a lesser prince, sips his wine and murmurs something about the weather. You respond in kind, tapping your fan twice against your knee, signaling you understand. The joke here is cosmic. The whole city's obsessed with war, but the real weapons are people like you, soft-voiced, sharp-tongued, trained not in swordplay, but in listening. Because pillow talk wasn't always about passion. Sometimes it was espionage, sometimes it was survival, and sometimes it was revenge with a smile. The Tang court was a jungle lush, beautiful, and entirely carnivorous. Official debates might be recorded in the palace annals, but real decisions were made in whispers between silk sheets. Ambassadors from Silla, Tibet, and the Abbasid Caliphate knew this. They brought gifts not just of gold and horses, but of conversation poets, dancers, young men trained to quote Laozi and praise the emperor's calligraphy mid-cuddle. These weren't bribes, they were vessels, living envelopes. The most effective ones carried not only charm but information delivered during post-coital calm, when the emperor's guards had dozed off and the walls still listened. You've heard the stories, of course. One involves a courtesan named Lin Yu, trained in 3 languages and 10 dialects of Tang regionalism, who spent 2 years earning the trust of a bureaucrat high in the Ministry of Rights. He believed she loved him. She believed nothing. But every night she slipped her fingers into his hair and asked, "What burdens your mind today?" And he told her, taxes, military allocations, trade agreements, all of it memorized and sent, folded into fan messages and perfume sachets, across the desert to her real master. By the time he found out, it was too late. He didn't arrest her. He begged her to stay. She laughed, left, never returned. Historians still argue whether she ever existed, whether she was one woman or many, whether her legend is fact or fantasy. But in this world, the story alone is power. Everyone believes in the one who whispered nations into submission. You adjust your fan, keeping your face composed. The man beside you leans closer. "Do you know," he says softly, "that a certain prince has a preference for mourning widows? That he keeps one in each city he visits?" You don't respond. He's testing you. If you answer too eagerly, he'll know you're desperate. Too cold, and he'll lose interest. So you raise your wine to your lips and say, "Only a fool thinks grief isn't strategic." He smiles. You've passed. He doesn't need to say more. The fan carries the rest. Later, in your quarters, you'll decode the message fully. For now it's enough to feel the weight of the moment. You aren't just someone's companion tonight. You're someone's chess piece. And you're about to move. This wasn't new. Even in the earliest years of the dynasty, lovers of power learned that the bed was the safest battlefield. The Empress Wu Zixin, yes, the one who rose from concubinage to rule the empire, mastered the art long before she took the throne. She reportedly once whispered into Emperor Tazong's ear while removing his boots, "I wonder if heaven is more comfortable than this floor." And by the time the wine wore off, he had granted her a private garden and 2 personal guards. That wasn't flirting, that was maneuvering, and it worked. Because emperors were lonely, always. And loneliness breeds confession. You know this. You've watched powerful men and women unravel after one night of being truly listened to. The sound of silk rustling. The faint scent of sandalwood, a well-placed question. That's all it takes. Once, in a bathhouse not far from the city gates, you overheard a conversation that changed everything for a provincial governor. Two young soldiers, drunk on wine and attention, chatted with a woman whose lap doubled as a confession booth. One of them joked about an arms shipment arriving late. She laughed, fed him another drink. He elaborated. The next morning, someone intercepted the shipment. A week later, his superior was demoted. She never admitted involvement. Why would she? The joke had already told the truth. And this is where it gets deliciously ironic. Tang China, with its rigid codes of propriety, was built on systems of secret informality. Behind the Confucian lectures and the Buddha statues, behind the bureaucratic scrolls and incense ceremonies, lay a culture where the softest voice often made the loudest decisions. And you're learning the dialect. You fold the fan carefully and place it beside your bed. Tonight, you sleep alone. But your dreams are full of voices. Whispers of courtships turned conspiracies. Laughter turned leverage. A kiss that cost. A province. In your dream, someone reaches out to touch your wrist, not in lust, but in loyalty. They ask you, if I tell you the truth, will you bury it or use it? You don't answer. Because in dreams, like in bedchambers, silence speaks. First, when you wake, the fan is still there. You reach for it instinctively, not for comfort, for clarity. It's not a toy. It's a tool. And tonight, it's not cooling anyone. It's setting fire to the future. You don't belong here, not exactly. Not by birth, not by rank. And yet, here you are slipping past paper screens and velvet drapes into a world where your name doesn't matter, only your presence. The music is soft, stringed and slow, like a memory unspooling. The scent of lotus root and cloves curls in the air, clinging to your robe. You've entered the domain of the elite courtesans, Chang'an's most dangerously educated women. And they're watching you like cats at the edge of a sunbeam, half-lidded, elegant, and utterly in control. You were invited, of course. No one stumbles into this place by accident. And certainly not into the company of the woman now approaching you, Lady Fayan, known across 3 provinces for the way she finishes a poem with her eyes closed, as if reciting from the marrow of her bones. Her name means flying swallow, but there's nothing delicate about her. She doesn't glide, she stalks. You stand because you have to, not out of deference, but instinct. This is not the Empress, but you suspect she's more powerful. She doesn't speak immediately. Instead, she hands you a cup of something warm. Wine, yes, but not just wine steeped with cinnamon and dried plum, and probably a test. You sip. It burns slightly, she smiles. Good, she says. Only fools fear heat. That's your introduction to the courtesan's world, where intimacy isn't something offered, it's something performed. Controlled, measured, and never free. Lady Fayan leads you to a round table set with ink, brushes, and half-finished scrolls. The others are already seated. A dozen women, all cloaked in muted tones, as if their clothes are apologizing for how vivid their minds are. They don't ask who you are. They don't need to. If you're here, someone has deemed you worthy of conversation. Or humiliation. Or both. The evening is not about sex. Not yet. First comes the poetry duel. Yes, it's a thing. In this world, verbal dexterity is as arousing as a touch to the throat. One by one, the courtesans take turns finishing lines begun by another. Each completion a layered flirtation, a layered challenge. The moon hides her face, one begins. Because even she envies your glow, another finishes mockingly. The room titters. Because she saw what you did, says a third, drier, and the table breaks into laughter. Even Lady Fayan laughs, and it's not a sound, it's a weapon. She turns to you. Your turn, she says, and you feel it the shift. Now you're not a guest, you're prey. But you lean forward, dip your brush, and write without thinking. The moon hides her face. Because she remembers the night we lied. Silence. Then Lady Fian nods once. Acceptance. And maybe something more. Because now she leans closer and says, "Careful. You might pass for one of us." In Tang society, courtesans weren't just entertainers. They were the true aristocrats of language. Many were born to poverty, but educated beyond the wildest dreams of nobility. They studied rhetoric, politics, calligraphy, and philosophy, not to impress, but to dominate. Their salons were attended by scholars, ministers, even monks, who came not for sex, but for the thrill of being intellectually outmatched. Pillow talk with a courtesan wasn't a prelude to pleasure, it was the pleasure. There's a recorded incident in the diaries of a Tang nobleman, Lord Han, who visited a famed courtesan and left after 3 hours without even touching her. His explanation? She unraveled me with 6 questions and a proverb. What need had I for her body, when her mind already possessed me? The courtesans kept notebooks of the best things lovers ever said to them. Not for flattery, for use. One woman reportedly plagiarized a client's compliment in her next encounter, just to see if he recognized his own words. He didn't. She never saw him again. Your evening unfolds like silk, slow, layered, opulent. The women take turns describing their dreams, but each dream is a metaphor for something else. Lady Fian speaks of a garden with no walls. Another speaks of a mirror that reflects someone else's face. A third describes a fire that whispers instead of crackles. Each description is loaded. You know this. These are code phrases, some for desire, some for regret, some for political allegiance. You offer your own dream. A kite flying in the dark, its string tied to something unseen. They all nod. They know what you mean. It's the courtesans who understand longing best. After all, they live in it. They're desired, but never chosen. Admired, but rarely believed. People tell them everything and trust them with nothing. And yet, they endure. Not because they must, but because they choose to. They know something others don't. That true power lies not in what you take, but in what you withhold. And now the evening shifts again. Lady Fian rises and walks to her chamber, beckoning you to follow. Inside, her room is cool, dim. The scent of cedar and ink thicken the air. She doesn't undress. She sits at her writing table and begins a letter. To no one, she says, but someone will read it. You sit across from her. Watch her brush dance. When she finishes, she rolls the scroll and hands it to you. Read it when I forget your name, she says, not before. You nod, though you don't understand. Not yet. Then she leans forward, touches your face. Not seductively, almost clinically. You're learning, she says. But remember, the tongue is soft, and that's why it survives. That night, you don't sleep with her. You don't need to. She's already taken you apart with 3 glances and a metaphor about firewood. You leave before dawn, the scroll in your sleeve, and you realize something. This was the most intimate night of your life, and no one touched you. The courtesans teach you this. Sex is not the most dangerous thing that can happen between 2 people. A question is. A pause is. A sentence whispered like a secret and remembered like a scar. And when you walk back to your quarters, the city, still sleeping, you're changed, not because of what was said, but because of how deeply it was heard. You wake to the aftermath. The sun's not yet fully risen, but the scent of last night still clings to your skin. Roasted lotus seed, old ink, a memory of cinnamon. The scroll Lady Fian gave you remains tucked inside your sleeve, unbroken. Heavier than it should be. But it's not the letter you're thinking about. It's the moment after the silence that curled between you two like a cat, warm and heavy and wordless. And that silence lingers still as you move through the early palace corridors. Everyone here walks like they're part of a ritual, slow, deliberate, choreographed. You blend in because you've learned how, but you're heading somewhere most people avoid unless summoned. the hangover quarters. That's not the official name, of course. On paper, this wing is for morning rituals and restoration. In practice, it's the unspoken halfway house between indulgence and consequence. Because after the passion, the poetry, and the secrets whispered over wine, someone still has to face the morning, and mornings here are brutal. Not in the way of swords or scoldings, but in how they reveal things. Who stayed too long? Who left too early? Who slept with the wrong person? Or worse, said the wrong thing. You step into a small bathing room where steam curls like lazy ghosts, and there's your first subject of study. A nobleman of middling rank slumped on a stone bench, head in his hands. His robe is open, his dignity is not. He sees you and groans. "What did I say last night?" he asks. You shrug. Depends who was listening. He laughs like a man being gently buried, then reaches for a jar hangover remedy, strong enough to wake the dead, but not polite company. He drinks, gags, burps plum. "I remember a woman," he mutters, "and a story about rice that made me cry. That's it." You pat his shoulder. "You're lucky. You didn't start a war." Not everyone's so fortunate. Because this is the secret. 10 mornings were often where the real rankings were decided, not in court, not in reports, but in who left whose bed at what hour, who got seen sneaking back into their quarters, who couldn't make eye contact during breakfast. The pillow might have heard the confession, but the hangover wrote the report. That's why these rooms exist, sanctuaries for the powerful who needed a pause between debauchery and decorum. Within these walls, eunuchs whisper cures, servants reaptly make up to bitten necks, and sometimes people trade confessions they don't realize are still dangerous. In one corner, a woman of rank applies sandalwood powder to her wrists, pretending her pulse isn't racing. You recognize her not from title, but from a poem someone once quoted at a banquet. She smells like lost cities. She glances at you, says nothing. Smart. 2 guards stand near the entrance, not to protect the people inside, but to keep the curious out. This room is sacred not because it's private, but because it's collectively ignored. And in it, you find rituals. Ginger tea for clarity. Ice on the wrists for discretion. Rose water to wash away the scent of the wrong perfume. Every item is symbolic. Every act restorative theater. Even the towels, embroidered with imperial cranes, are designed to wipe away more than sweat. You sit beside a young man you vaguely recognize from last week's feast. He's holding a jade pendant in one hand, turning it over and over like it holds a secret he can't quite remember. "She gave me this," he whispers, "but I can't recall if it was before or after she told me her real name." You glance at the pendant. It's cracked. That's not symbolic. That's prophetic. "Maybe don't mention the name," you suggest. Even to yourself. He nods like a student who's been given the answer, but still doesn't understand the question. And that's the beauty of mornings here. Clarity arrives slowly, if at all. But let's not romanticize it. There's danger too. One story tells of a noble who fell asleep beside his lover, only to wake to an empty bed and an unsigned scroll detailing his treasonous opinions of the emperor's latest tax reforms. The scroll wasn't sent. It was left as a warning. "We remember it," said at the end. Do you? He did. He left court that afternoon. Voluntarily, if you believe the official account. Less voluntarily, if you've ever seen what regret looks like when it wears perfume. And this brings us to your required sex story of the section, because, yes, even hangovers carry desire. One noble couple, famously discreet during their years of political alliance masquerading as marriage, were discovered by accident in a state of extremely inventive entanglement by a maid who came to change their incense. Rather than shame, the nobleman invited the maid to recite the poem she'd written for him the previous week. He liked to hear verse after climax, he said. She did. It rhymed. Everyone survived. The poem? Now taught in certain private academies. As an example of postcoital verse that references both statcraft and salted duck. Tang priorities, you see. But back to you. Someone offers you a cloth soaked in green tea. You take it, press it to your temples. You didn't drink too much last night, but you're still intoxicated by language, by touch, by implication, and by the memory of what Lady Fayan didn't say. The scroll in your sleeve feels heavier now. You haven't opened it. You won't. Not yet. Because in the Tang morning, restraint is the only thing that keeps you from becoming a story. And no one wants to be the main character in someone else's scandal. You exit the room quietly, past the guards who pretend not to see you. The palace is stirring now. Robes rustle like wind in high grass. Shoes tap against stone floors. The formalities are returning. But you carry the hangover in your chest. A soft throb of too much meaning. Too many metaphors, too many glances that lasted longer than they should have. And as you walk, you think, maybe the real power wasn't in the pillow talk after all. Maybe it's in what you remember. Or pretend to forget. There's a door you're not supposed to notice. Tucked behind a tapestry in the northern wing of the compound, just past a mural of celestial dancers so vivid they seem to breathe. Most people walk right by. That's the point. But you've heard whispers low, wine-wet stories about what lies beyond. Not a torture chamber, not a treasure vault. Something far more forbidden. A room where rules dissolve like sugar in tea. You pull the tapestry aside. The stone wall behind it is unmarked, except for a single line etched in old calligraphy, asterisk, silence. Knows the truth before the tongue does. Then you see it, an indentation in the stone, just the shape and width of a palm. You place your hand there, the door opens. No sound, just a breath of cool, perfumed air and a descending staircase. Lit by oil lamps so faint they seem ashamed of their own glow. You walk down into a place that feels older than the palace above. The walls curve inward, cloistering you in velvet shadow. And then you arrive. A room, circular, candlelit, pillowed, and already half full. You're not alone. And you're definitely not the most important person here. This is a clandestine chamber of the Tang elite. Not where they come to hide affairs, but where they come to have conversations they can't afford to have anywhere else. Whispers hang in the air, like incense. You hear languages Persian, Tibetan, even a lilting Greek blending with the soft syllables of refined Mandarin. A woman with silver in her braid sits beside a masked man. Neither speaks. Their fingers are intertwined. On a cushion across from them, a poet you once watched weep at a banquet recites something so low and broken you can't tell if it's prayer or confession. Welcome to one of Chang'an's worst-kept secrets, the hidden salons of the Tang underground, where taboo isn't just tolerated, it's invited. These rooms exist in the liminal spaces, behind bathhouses, under tea houses, above temples where gods conveniently turn away. They are for the unspeakable things. Not sins, ideas, desires, real identities. Here, lovers remove their roles like robes. Monks speak like men, ministers cry, eunuchs flirt. Women laugh too loudly. No one records anything. No one repeats anything. It's the only reason it works. And the only reason it's dangerous. You sit. A man offers you wine. Another offers you a fan. Both gestures mean the same thing. You're safe, but not from yourself. There's no structure here, but there is rhythm. People speak in turns, no names, only stories. Some are erotic, some are horrific. One woman describes her dream of being a fish, chased through warm rivers by a man made of fire. Everyone listens like it's scripture. A young man tells a story of how his mother used to burn his father's love letters before reading them aloud, just to keep their passion private, even in death. Another older, voice like broken jade, describes the moment he realized he loved a man while watching him. Paint, no touch, no word, just brushstroke after brushstroke, each one a declaration. You don't speak at first. You're listening. That's what you're here for. The things that aren't allowed in the world above. Because this isn't just a space for secrets. It's a space for truths that sound like heresy outside silk walls. This is where some of the most intimate pillow talk in all of Tang society happened. Not between lovers, but between strangers who might never meet again. It wasn't always sexual. Sometimes it was spiritual. Sometimes political. Sometimes both. Tangled so tightly, no one could tell which was which. One eunuch, known only as Red Sandalwood, was rumored to attend these gatherings weekly. He never removed his veil, never offered more than a few lines of poetry. But once, he whispered something to a general that changed a campaign's entire course. Not a strategy, a fear. He said I reminded him of the boy he couldn't save. That general returned home and resigned. No one ever explained why. You! Meet someone finally. She calls herself Sparrow. She doesn't ask your name. Only says, "What do you want to forget?" You don't answer right away. Then you say, "The sound of my own voice when I lie." She nods. Say something true then. Something only you would know, you think. Then whisper, "I once recited a love poem to a corpse, just to see if it felt different." She smiles, sad and delighted. Did it? You nod. It did. This is the language of this place, half confession, half provocation. Every sentence is a step deeper. Into yourself. You don't realize how much you've said until someone leans over and presses a jasmine-scented cloth into your hand. A gift, or a goodbye. You don't ask, you don't need to. And now your sex story. This one isn't even whispered anymore. It's become a kind of sacred myth down here. About a monk who broke his vow of silence not with speech, but with moaning. He fell in love with a woman who never spoke. They communicated through writing, then through touch, and finally through breathing. Their bodies had a dialogue the scriptures never prepared them for. One night, he gasped. Just once. It echoed off the stone like thunder. Afterward, he wrote a single word on her back with his fingertip. Enough, then he vanished. Some say he returned to his monastery and never spoke again. Others say he followed her voice into the next life. Historians don't argue about this one, not because they don't care, but because they know better than to question sacred things. You don't know how long you stay. Time here moves sideways. But when you leave, blinking into the daylight, that leaks from the upper corridors, you carry something with you. Not scandal. Not memory. Permission. The permission to speak freely, if only once. To let yourself be heard without the weight of consequence. You think of all the people above trapped in roles, rehearsing scripts, playing parts they didn't audition for. And you think of the man in the salon who cried while describing the sound of his lover's laugh. You wonder who he is by day. A butcher? A bureaucrat? A prince? Doesn't matter. Down here, he was just someone with a story. And so were you. You return to your quarters just before sunrise, not because you're tired, but because the city above is waking, and you know better than to be seen leaving a place no one admits exists. Your robe smells of jasmine and secrets, and in your sleeve is a cloth still damp with someone else's confession. You place it carefully in the lacquered chest beneath your bed, right next to the unopened scroll from Lady Fayan, and sit in silence, waiting for your breath to slow. The room feels different now. Not emptier, but heavier, like it's absorbed everything you heard last night and refuses to let it go. But you don't want to let go either. Not yet. You lie back and stare at the silk canopy above your bed, embroidered with birds mid-flight. And you think about how little of the Tang Dynasty was built on declarations. Most of it, you realize, was built on what was left unsaid. And yet, they recorded everything, sometimes in the most unexpected places. Because here's the trick. Even if words were whispered, the Tang found ways to remember. Not through official documents, but through art. Erotic scrolls, yes, but also paintings, poetry, pottery. Little fragments that slipped past the censors and the Confucians, straight into the hands of those who knew how to read between the brushstrokes. You rise, drawn to the low table by the window, where a new scroll has appeared, delivered silently. While you were away, the Tang way of saying, I see you, even when you think you're invisible. This one's different. It's not poetry, it's a painting. You unfurl it slowly, and there it is. Two lovers, tangled beneath a weeping willow. But they're not the focus. The true subject is the moon above them, painted not as a perfect circle, but as an open mouth. You stare. Not because it's beautiful, though it is, but because you understand the trick. The moon is gossip. It watches, listens, tells no one, and yet knows everything. Just like the art, just like the artist. The Tang were masters of double meaning. Every brushstroke held layers of pleasure, of pain, of rebellion. A flower wasn't just a flower, it was a metaphor for a body part. A plum tree didn't just signify winter's end. It hinted at forbidden's love blooming out of season. Even birds had codes. A crane for loyalty, a sparrow for longing, a phoenix for power cloaked in beauty. Entire stories played out in the background of supposedly innocent landscapes. A couple standing apart? Check the reflection in the pond, they're kissing. A scholar reading alone? Look at his sleeve, there's another hand beneath it. Tang. Erotic art didn't scream, it whispered. Which made it more dangerous. Because if you couldn't prove what you saw, you couldn't punish it. But everyone still understood. One famous painting, known simply as the tea ceremony, depicts a woman pouring tea while a man watches. That's it. No touch, no exposed skin, but the angle of her wrist, the bend of his gaze, the steam rising between them, it all screams intimacy. Scholars still debate its meaning. Some claim it's about discipline. Others say it's an allegory for power imbalance. A few insist it's just about tea. But people don't smuggle paintings across provinces for tea. You pull out an old scroll from your chest, one you acquired weeks ago in the East Market. You've studied it before, but now after last night it feels different. This one shows a bedchamber, viewed from above. A man and a woman lie side by side, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Nothing touches, nothing moves. But beside them, on a low table, sits an open scroll, and next to it, an overturned inkstone. You used to think it meant frustration. Now you think it means climax. Because what if the moment they wanted most had nothing to do with skin? What if it was the sentence written just before they stopped writing? This was the Tang erotic spirit, not graphic but suggestive, not loud but haunting. They understood that the most powerful intimacy was the kind that unfolded in the mind, slowly, like mist curling through pines. This wasn't prudery, it was precision. They didn't need to show bodies to depict sex. They showed aftermath, anticipation, the slipper abandoned mid-step, the candle burned low but not out, the bed made too neatly. Tang artists knew how to draw tension so thick it made the viewer complicit. You weren't just seeing, you were imagining. And imagination, after all, is the most illicit lover. You return to the new scroll and notice something else. A small signature in the corner, hidden beneath a flower. A single character, Ching. No title, no seal, just a name. You don't recognize it. That's rare. Which means either this is a forgery or something far more interesting. An anonymous artist. Possibly a woman. Possibly a courtesan. Possibly someone who wasn't allowed to speak in court, but painted what she couldn't say aloud. There were many like her. One, known only as the Lotus Ghost, was said to have painted dreams, literal dreams told to her by clients. She'd listen as they lay beside her, half asleep, murmuring confessions, and then paint what they couldn't remember the next morning. Her works were often destroyed, too revealing. But a few survive tucked into private collections, passed down like recipes for forbidden desire. One scroll shows a pair of hands reaching out of water, not drowning but offering something. A ring, a letter, a strand of hair. No one can agree. But the emotion is clear: grief, longing, and intimacy too deep for explanation. You touch the edge of the scroll before you, wondering if Ching was one of hers, or perhaps a rival, maybe a lover, maybe just another voice that survived only because it found a way to hide in plain sight. And this is your fringe tidbit for the night. Tang erotic art was often commissioned as gifts between lovers, not just aristocrats, but soldiers, merchants, even monks. One recovered piece from a rural estate shows two monks sharing a bowl of rice while one traces characters on the other's back with a brush. A companion poem reads, "The body is a temple, but the breath, your breath is prayer." It was unsigned, but the owner, a middle-aged widow, kept it sealed in a sandalwood box tucked under her mattress. When she died, they found it unwrapped. No one knows who opened it. You roll up the new scroll slowly, respectfully, and place it beside the others. You're collecting something now, not just artifacts, but echoes. Fragments of intimacy that slipped through cracks in history and landed here, in your care. And as you blow out the candle and settle into bed once more, you feel something rare. Not arousal, not peace, recognition. As if someone centuries ago saw you, not your face, but your hunger for meaning, and painted this moment just for you. You're not supposed to laugh this hard in a library, especially not in one that smells like cedar and reverence, filled with scholars so rigid they make the scrolls look flexible. But there you are, hunched over a bamboo slip, trying not to wheeze, tears pooling in your eyes as you silently lose it over a 1,200-year-old fart joke. And no, you didn't misread. It's definitely a fart joke. Something about a minister mistaking the Empress's perfume for divine wind, until she lifted her robe and revealed she was, in fact, the source. The punchline involves a gold fan, an emergency exit, and a dog that barked in solidarity. High comedy Tang style. You glance around. No one else is reacting, which makes it worse. The silence amplifies your hysteria, and you wonder, how did this even survive? That's the beautiful absurdity of it. Among the dignified annals of war and poetry and Confucianism, tucked inside the more respectable records of the Tang Dynasty, live a whole underworld of lewdness, laughter, and lowbrow delight. Dirty jokes, smutty plays, satirical sketches about bedchamber mishaps, pillow talk gone wrong, turned into stage routines and public puppet shows. The elite loved it. The scholars tolerated it. The people worshipped it. This was Chang'an humor. Equal parts clever, cruel, and deeply human. You shift your attention to a newer stack, crumbling scrolls, copied from tavern walls, collected by a monk who claimed he was preserving the soul of the street. That's what he called it. And here's what the soul of the street sounds like. If her sigh is louder than the flute, run. You're out of rhythm. Or, a man who brags in bed is like a rooster in winter, useless and cold. You choke. Again, the monk even added footnotes, possibly referencing General Han's failed liaison with the South Market courtesan. See also, silk does not hide shame. And suddenly, you see the whole city differently. Not just as a place of silk robes and poetic sighs, but of ridiculous, raunchy humanity. Because for every scholar perfecting his calligraphy, there was a guy in a bathhouse composing limericks about love letters smeared with chicken grease. For every emperor writing verses to his favorite concubine, there was a eunuch in the background, imitating his moans and making the servants collapse in laughter. Humor was everywhere. And much of it, especially the bawdy kind, came from the bedrooms. Because nothing's funnier than what goes wrong in pursuit of pleasure. One particularly infamous court skit involved a fictionalized version of a real scandal. A noblewoman seduced 3 scholars in one night, accidentally mixed up their underwear, and then tried to explain the mix-up as an experiment in Confucian. Rotational theory. The play, performed at a lantern festival, reportedly made the chancellor laugh so hard he dropped his fan into a koi pond. That fan is now in a museum. You look down at this slip in your hand, and here's your sex story for the night. Though story is generous. It's more of a confession disguised as a joke. A high-ranking guard wrote, "She asked me to write poetry on her thigh. I ran out of ink. She said, 'Then use your imagination.' I did. We never spoke again. But I still hear her thighs reciting Tang verse in my sleep. Is it true? Doesn't matter. It's funny. And kind of heartbreaking." That was the genius of Tang humor. It always balanced just on the edge of something deeper. Even the jokes carried ache. You find another scroll, this one a script from a traveling troupe known for combining slapstick with politics. The plot: a lovesick bureaucrat can't write a love letter because his ink keeps freezing. So he tries to warm it with body heat. Every time he gets close, his libido makes him forget what he was writing. In the end, he accidentally sends a military decree to his lover and a sonnet to the garrison. The emperor promotes him anyway, for originality. It's all ridiculous, but also sharp. This was satire with teeth. The performers knew what they were doing. Laughing at sex wasn't just entertainment, it was catharsis. A way to survive a society that demanded perfection by celebrating the mess. And it wasn't just men doing the laughing. Women especially. Courtesans were often the best comedians. One scroll preserved a list of quips from Lady Zun, a famous wit of the East Market. Among them, "He called my body a temple. I told him not to worship so loudly." Or, he said he found poetry. "In my eyes," I said, "then blink. You're too close." Her jokes were carved into the sides of wine cups sold in the market for years. And here's the kicker: humor made her more desirable, not less. Because in the Tang Dynasty, wit was sexy. Cleverness was seductive. A woman who could reduce you with a punchline was more dangerous than one who could sing. Pillow talk wasn't. All longing and metaphor. Sometimes it was playful. Sometimes it was teasing. Sometimes it was brutal. And often, it was hilarious. Lovers would test each other with riddles during foreplay, reward good answers with kisses, and bad ones with tickles or mockery. One couple is rumored to have held a contest. Whoever could make the other laugh first had to be the submissive that night. The woman won by pretending to fall asleep mid-caress. He married her the next week. Historians still argue whether this account was metaphorical, or if it was just very good pillow talk. You gather your scrolls, not because you're done, but because you're overwhelmed. Too much laughter is a kind of intimacy too. It opens something, softens you. You step out of the library into the morning, light bouncing off the golden roof. Tiles like gossip. Everything feels different now. The city doesn't look solemn. It looks like it's trying not to smirk. You see a pair of maids giggling behind their sleeves. A scribe tripping over his own robes because he's mouthing a rhyme he just thought of. Even the guards look like they've recently heard something juicy. And maybe they have. Because in this city, in this time, in this wild brief moment of history called the Tang Dynasty, everyone has a story. Some are tragic, some erotic, some revolutionary, and some just really, really funny. You're being watched. Not in the way that makes your skin crawl. This isn't paranoia, it's performance. You're seated at the edge of a garden pavilion, watching koi fish argue beneath lily pads. And somewhere behind the screen of bamboo and moonlight, someone else is watching you. You can feel it. That lingering gaze, not yet bold enough to become a touch, but too heavy to be just curiosity. And this is not new. In Chang'an, nothing powerful ever happens in daylight, and nothing truly important is done in public. This city runs on performance, on the power of implication. And no theater is more dangerous, more precise, than the bedrooms of the Tang imperial court. You shift your weight, turn just slightly enough to show your silhouette, not your face. Calculated movement, measured, because if they're watching, then you might as well give them a scene to remember. Pillow talk, you've learned, didn't just stay between lovers. It spread, it leaked. It grew legs and wore robes and whispered through corridors until the walls themselves gossiped. The imperial court was shaped not by declarations in the villa, throne room, but by rumors forged in bed. This is the real battlefield, not open, not declared, but waged beneath silk. Last night, you overheard something. A name, a promise, a plan to shift loyalty from one court faction to another, whispered in the shaky breath between kisses. It wasn't meant for you, but now you carry it. That kind of knowledge is a responsibility or a weapon. The court is divided. Factions form like mold in shadow noble houses, merchant backers, regional generals. None of it written, none of it official, but all of it traceable through the pillow alliances made and broken nightly. One concubine favors the minister of ceremonies. A eunuch carries messages between the palace and the northern garrison. A court poet, known for verses about spring blossoms, embeds coded sedition into his third lines. Everyone smiles. Everyone bows, but they all know the real throne is a bed, and the empire rests its head on embroidered pillows stuffed with secrets. A story still passed around involves Lady Shan, a minor consort whose only real asset was a honeyed voice and the ability to mimic a man's speech patterns perfectly. She once impersonated the emperor in bed, repeating phrases he'd uttered to her earlier, just loud enough for the maid outside the room to hear. By morning, that maid was leaking imperial decrees to a faction in the South Court. 2 weeks later, a governor was executed based on words the emperor never said. When the truth came out, the emperor didn't punish Lady Xian, he promoted her. If she can imitate my voice, he said, she can protect it. Pillow politics at its sharpest. That's the atmosphere you navigate now, fluid, shifting, intimate. Even now, as the shadows grow deeper around the pavilion, you know that the person watching you isn't watching for pleasure. They're watching for alignment, for clues, for leverage. And you're giving them just enough to stay interesting. You remember another tale, perhaps apocryphal, but isn't everything in Chang'an a little fictional? About a nobleman who courted 3 powerful families simultaneously by betting their daughters and leaking pillow talk that painted him as loyal to each. He was discovered when 2 of the women showed up to the same poetry recital, wearing matching hairpins, his gift, which he'd claimed was unique. He survived, barely. Changed his name, became a monk. But not before carving the phrase, truth is a choice, into the wall of the public bathhouse. That bathhouse is still there. The carving? Covered with lacquer, preserved for tourists. No one admits to knowing what it means. Everyone knows exactly what it means. You rise slowly from the pavilion and begin walking toward the eastern wing of the garden, where the willows hang lower and the air is warmer. You're not trying to escape the gaze anymore. You're inviting it. Because you've decided, if this is theater, then let the curtain rise. Your fingers brush a camellia petal as you walk. You pluck it, just one, and let it fall behind you. Like a breadcrumb. Pillow talk may be private, but influence is always public. And in a city that listens more than it sees, gestures speak louder than decrees. You enter a side room empty, cool, scented faintly with vetiver and memory. There's already someone inside. Of course, the watcher. Not masked, not cloaked. Just sitting there, waiting. Their robe is gray, unadorned. Their eyes unreadable. You left the window open, they say. That's how the words got in. You nod. Did they say anything worth repeating? Only everything. This is how Tang negotiations begin, not at desks, but on cushions. Not with terms, but with metaphors. You both know the stakes. You just don't know which of you will flinch first. The conversation flows like wine poured too fast. They reference a shipment of sandalwood, a missed ceremony, a missing lover. You respond with verses, hints, implications. It's not flirting, though it smells like it. It's not seduction, though the tension crackles. This is diplomacy. Tang. Style. And here's your required sex story of the night, one you're not supposed to know. But everyone does. The Empress once received a gift. A hand-carved bed frame, designed to creak in the rhythm of Tang court music. She used it sparingly. But one night, her partner, an ambitious official, noticed the rhythm matched a popular drinking song. He hummed along. She stopped mid-motion. That, she said, was the national anthem of my previous dynasty. He paused. She laughed. He did not receive a promotion. But the story survived, mostly because the bed ended up in the West Market. As a novelty, it's now an overpriced tea table. Tourists sip jasmine from it and have no idea. Tang history isn't written in ink. It's stitched into pillows, whispered through veils, carved into bed frames. The person across from you leans in now, close enough that you see the flecks of gold in their irises. So, they whisper, what will you say when they ask where you were tonight? You smile. I'll say I went looking for silence, and found someone louder than the court. The deal, if that's what this is unspoken. But it's sealed. You know they'll protect you now, or destroy you more carefully. Either way, you're part of the game. And as you walk back into the night, the air heavy with unsaid things, you realize something about pillow politics. It isn't about who speaks, it's about who's believed. And you, tonight, were very believable. You dream of dragons, but not the kind that fly. No fire, no wings. Just the slow, sinuous movement of a tattooed serpent, winding across someone's back as they lie face down on a jade green mattress, breathing in shallow bursts while someone whispers instructions beside them. Inhale, count to 9. Imagine your breath moving through your hips like ink on silk. The voice isn't yours, but you're inside the dream as if it were memory. You watch as fingers press along the spine, tracing pressure points with deliberate grace, like writing a poem in invisible characters. This isn't a massage. It's not even foreplay. It's a ritual. Erotic esoterica, Tang alchemy in action. When you wake, your mouth tastes faintly of ginseng and lust. Because this is no longer a matter of court gossip or casual pleasure. You're in the deep part of the pool, now the place where sex becomes not just political or poetic, but metaphysical. Where Taoist principles and bedroom practices merge into something more ambitious. Immortality through intimacy. You think of the manuals you've seen. The scrolls passed hand to hand in the back rooms of apothecaries, or hidden beneath the robes of monks who definitely weren't supposed to have them. Ancient texts wrapped in silk and rumor, filled with diagrams of coiled energy and cryptic. Instructions like, do not finish, or the gate closes forever. This wasn't superstition. It was a system, a science. Tang scholars didn't just study the stars. They studied the body as a celestial map. Yin and yang, fire and water. The breath, the pulse, the exchange. Sex was not a release. It was a tool, a ladder, a door. According to one Taoist manual, the most potent form of immortality was achieved by harnessing the life force of a willing partner, never by force, always by rhythm. The phoenix does not take what is not offered, the text reads. But, once accepted, she gives back double. You remember reading that and wondering how many deaths were delayed by a single night of perfect timing. The concept is simple, if insane. A properly aligned couple can circulate energy during sex in such a way that they extend life, enhance memory, and unlock cosmic understanding. It requires breath control, mutual focus, a terrifying degree of self-awareness, and absolutely no climax, at least not in the traditional sense. You smile at the absurdity of it, until you remember that one of the emperor's favorite physicians swore by it. He kept a household of women, not for pleasure, but for practice, each trained in the art of preserving the essence. One woman, a former street performer turned alchemical courtesan, was said to be able to slow her own heartbeat to match her partner's. During one session, she allegedly stopped it entirely. Just for a moment, just to see what would happen. He wrote a poem about it. When her heart paused, mine panicked. In that panic I found God. It's still quoted in certain bathhouses, often followed by knowing laughter. Because not everyone took it seriously. Some mocked it openly. A satirical play from the late Tang period featured a couple so obsessed with energy preservation, they never touched at all, only stared at each other from opposite ends of the room, breathing in sync, until one of them fell asleep from boredom. The play was banned. The actors briefly were not. You've seen both sides of this now, the mysticism, the mockery, and yet something about it stays with you. Maybe it's the discipline. The idea that pleasure could be something crafted, studied, elevated, not just indulged. That intimacy could be a practice, not a pastime. You walk through the garden alone, thinking of someone you once loved who used to breathe in your rhythm even when you weren't speaking. The way they would trace circles on your palm during silence, as if tuning your pulse. You didn't understand it then. You thought it was habit. Now you think it was something older, something borrowed from a time before you. And that brings us to your nightly sex story, the one that belongs to someone else but might as well be yours. There was a Tang noble woman, known in the records only as Lady Wei, who rejected every marriage proposal offered to her by her family. Her excuse? None of them have read the fifth scroll. The fifth scroll, in Taoist erotic tradition, is the one that contains the breath cycle charts. Most don't make it past the third. The fourth requires partner verification. The fifth? That's initiation. Rumor has it she finally chose a partner after watching him meditate beneath a plum tree for 7 hours. She didn't speak to him. She simply entered his tent that night and lit a single candle. He didn't look up. She sat, matched his breath. 33 minutes later, they opened their eyes. Married a month later. No wedding, no contract, just shared respiration. Their descendants still claim to dream in pairs. Do you believe it? Doesn't matter. The Tang did. Because to them, believing in something gave it power. Sex was sacred, not because it was divine, but because it could make you feel like a god, if only briefly. And when you feel like a god, you treat your body like a temple, not a tavern. That distinction is everything. You reach your quarters and find, waiting at your door, a small jar of sandalwood oil and a single ginkgo leaf folded into a note. The note reads, "Tonight, if you breathe with me, you'll see stars behind your eyelids." No signature, no instruction. Just the promise. You bring the items inside. Sit, wait, prepare. Whether or not anyone arrives doesn't matter. What matters is this. For the first time, you're not waiting for pleasure. You're preparing for presence. The first thing you notice is the silence. Not the absence of sound. Chang'an never sleeps, but the specific, intentional hush that hangs in the air when something is about to happen. Or already has. You've just stepped into a room you weren't supposed to find. Not hidden exactly, just silent. Suspended in time. It's small, circular, windowless, draped entirely in silk. Not just the curtains, but the ceiling, the floors, even the lanterns. Everything muffled, soft, and everywhere red. Not the vulgar crimson of brothel cliches, but the deep, mature red of aged lacquer, of royal seals, of blood long dried. In the center sits a bed. Not large, not grand, just precise. 4 pillows, 2 layers of coverlets, 1 wooden chest, the foot half open. You move closer. Inside, silk slippers. Not new, not abandoned. Placed, arranged. A pair of male boots beside them. No names, no monograms, just the geometry of intimacy. Someone wanted this to be read. The bed isn't the story. The slippers are. You kneel. Run your fingers across the fabric. It's fine-threaded, expensive, but the solace are worn. Not ceremonial. Used. Often. You sit back on your heels and realize you've stumbled into something sacred. This isn't a bedroom. It's a conversation frozen in fabric. A silent record of 2 people who spoke without speaking. You wonder how many nights these slippers stood side by side before their owners did. And suddenly, everything around you becomes language. The silk on the wall isn't just decoration, it's signaling. Peonies, phoenixes, orchids. Each stitched. Motif a coded message in the Tang textile lexicon. You see it now. This entire room was a message passed between bodies. An erotic script written in thread. Because in the Tang Dynasty, silk wasn't just luxury, it was a language. The way it hung, folded, draped it, all meant something. It told you who wanted what, who offered, who withheld, and most of all, who belonged to whom. The lovers of the Tang didn't speak their desires, they wore them. A white outer robe meant a night of purity, no climax, just breath. A green sash hinted at experimentation. Yellow bedding signaled exclusivity, a claim of possession. But red meant memory. Not lust, not heat, memory. The kind that lingers long after the sheets are cold. In Chang'an, this was understood. You could walk into a room and know, just from the color of the bedding, whether the person inside was expecting comfort, domination, surrender, or goodbye. A servant once wrote in his diary that he dreaded delivering laundry not because of the weight, but because of the meaning. I carry their moods, he wrote, folded into sleeves, washed from their skin. You find yourself staring at a folded robe on the back of the chair, deep blue, embroidered with cranes in mid-flight, the symbol of renewal. You don't need to ask what happened here. Someone said something last night that made them want to start again. Maybe it worked. Maybe it didn't, but the robe is still here. So is the memory. And that's the thing, Tang bedchambers were never just physical spaces. They were letters, carefully curated. Every object spoke. A bronze mirror left face down. Regret. A candle extinguished with fingertips, not breath, impatience. An undone sash draped over the edge of the bed, invitation. And of course, the most telling of all, the shoes, the quiet poetry of them. Because the way you placed them told the story. Side by side, mutual desire. One facing away, regret. One missing entirely, betrayal. The irony is that the actual lovers often said little. They didn't have to. The room spoke for them. It was a third participant in every encounter. And sometimes, it spoke louder than either body. One empress reportedly designed an entire wing of her personal quarters, with different textiles for different suitors, black velvet for widowers, pale green muslin for poets, gold-threaded brocade for visiting diplomats. She never explained her choices. She never needed to. They understood. She became legend for it. Not for her beauty, but for her curation. Scholars later argued whether she invented the practice or simply perfected it. Doesn't matter. The silk remembers. And here's your required sex story, delicate, but sharp. A prominent nobleman once presented his lover with a gift. A robe embroidered with plum blossoms that only appeared when the fabric was wet. She wore it during a spring downpour, walking slowly through the garden while he watched from the corridor. Every step revealed more, but what turned him speechless wasn't her body. It was the fact that the blossoms formed a poem, a confession. 5 characters per line, stitched so subtly he hadn't noticed before. You will forget me. I will remain silk. She left that night. The robe stayed. He never wore anything else again. So yes, the Tang understood the power of textiles. They turned fabric into memory, into metaphor, into threat. You shift, rising to your feet, and glance once more at the slippers. The right one has a thread loose gold, fraying slightly at the edge. You almost tuck it in. But you don't. You leave it as it is. Because maybe that thread is the real message. A reminder that even perfection wants to unravel sometimes. And as you leave the room, you notice something you missed before. On the doorframe, etched so faintly you'd need moonlight to see it, is a single character. Liu, to remain, to stay behind. You smile, of course. Even when the bodies are gone, the silk stays. It remembers. It whispers. And tonight, it whispered to you. You never speak first to a bedchamber maid. Not because it's rude, but because it's dangerous. Words ripple in this palace like water, one wrong syllable, and you'll find yourself on the edge of a very high balcony, being very politely asked to reconsider your lifestyle. So when the maid no older than 16, hair pulled back so tight it could slice fruit, glances at you and says, "He cried last night," you know she's not gossiping. She's warning you. You nod barely. Did he stop? Eventually, she replies, "But the pillow was wet, and I wasn't going to ring for another." You've just entered a world within a world, the one rarely spoken of in official records, the realm of the servants, the invisible listeners, the ones who wash the bedding, light the candles, fetch the oils, sweep the footprints from the tile. They don't hold power, they hold knowledge, and that's worse. Because in the Tang Dynasty, the servants knew everything. They just didn't say it unless it served them. And tonight, they're saying it. You're in the laundry wing, but it might as well be the National Archives. Every corner hides a memory, pressed into the fabric like perfume and regret. The maids here don't just wash silk, they decode it. "This one's been wept on," says another, holding up a sash so sheer it might float. "Smells like sandalwood." And betrayal, probably second concubine. "No," chimes a third. "Sandalwood is fifth. Second uses magnolia oil. Smells sweeter, hides the fear better." They giggle, then move on. You stand silently in the corner, pretending to be bored. But you're listening. And you're learning. Because here's the secret. Pillow talk isn't always whispered between lovers. Sometimes it's echoed by the people who make the bed. These maids, these eunuchs, these quiet stewards of pleasure, they know more about the empire than the chancellors. They just have better manners. A eunuch passes you carrying a tray of herbal compresses. He doesn't make eye contact. But as he passes, he mutters, "The general's hip is worse again." He blamed the wine, but we all heard her leave at midnight. That's a full report. Health, shame, timeline, delivered without pause. You almost want to applaud. The Tang Palace was wired this way, an information network woven not through scrolls, but through sheets. The servants didn't just witness desire, they curated it. They controlled the candles, the temperature, the flow of the night. If a lover came too quickly, it was the servant who adjusted the incense blend the next time. If someone screamed too loudly, it was the servant who added thicker curtains. They were choreographers of silence, and they remembered everything. There's a reason some noble families kept the same chambermaid for generations. Not for loyalty, for continuity. Because no one else would know how to read the body like she did. Where to place the oils, how long to warm the stones, what stories to tell when the lights were low and the mood was fragile. One legendary attendant, Lady Ping, was said to be able to resurrect dead passion with a single anecdote. Her trick? She never told her own stories, only recycled the confession she'd overheard. Carefully edited, rephrased, but always familiar enough to sting. She once told a prince, Someone whispers beside you that his mouth reminded her of a man who died smiling. He fell in love with her that night. You turn. It's another maid, older, sharper, holding a pillow so white it hurts to look at. She eyes you. You're not supposed to be here. Neither are stories, you say. She grins, but they still arrive. And that's when she offers it. The pillow. You hesitate, then take it. It's heavy, damp at the corners. Not water, not wine. You sniff. Jujube tears, she says. He'd been drinking, then remembered her. No names, no details. Just evidence. You hand it back. She places it gently into the steaming basin, where another maid begins to scrub. As she does, she hums a tune you recognize, a lullaby. One sung only by mothers who gave up their children to the palace decades ago. Another record. Another secret. You're surrounded by archivists who don't write. They rinse. They wring. They fold. And in doing so, they preserve a version of history no historian will ever cite. So here's your sex story, quiet, undramatic. True, a young official, newly promoted, found himself unable to perform on his wedding night. Not from fear, but from grief. His former lover, a palace page, had died the week before. He told no one, but his chambermaid knew. She adjusted the room, lit rosemary instead of jasmine, brought in sheets that smelled like cedar, the scent of the old dormitories. And before the couple lay down, she whispered in his ear, "He said you were kind." The official never asked how she knew. He didn't need to. That night, he wept. Then, eventually, he touched his bride, gently, as if trying to translate memory into motion. The maid left before sunrise. She never spoke of it again. But she remembered, and so do the sheets, and so do you. Because that's the final truth of this section. The most powerful whispers aren't between lips. They're the ones caught by those standing just out of sight. The ones folding linens with eyes downcast but ears wide open. You leave the laundry wing changed. Not because of what you saw, but because of what you felt. The weight of unnoticed presence. The density of unspoken knowledge. And as you pass a maid on the way out, she doesn't greet you, doesn't bow. She just smiles and says, "Next time, bring gloves. Wet secret stain." The scent hits you. First, not incense, not perfume. Something foreign, spiced, rich. A hint of cumin tangled with rosewater, lingering on the silk banners that flutter over the Silk Road quarter. You're not in the imperial palace anymore. You've wandered west. Past the scholars, past the courtesans, past the guards who pretend they don't see you. Into a neighborhood that feels less like China and more like the world trying to speak Mandarin through a veil of cinnamon. This is where the merchants live, the dancers, the whisperers. Where caravans unload not just bolts of fabric and glass, beads, but gestures, expressions, languages that don't need translation when the lights are low. You're here for the same reason the emperors came, though they never said it aloud. To find out what desire sounds like with an accent. Because pillow talk, like trade, didn't stop at borders. It traveled. It evolved. And in Tang, China, it arrived wrapped in foreign metaphors and embroidered truths, whispered by tongues that curved around new syllables and remade intimacy in unfamiliar shapes. You pass a latticework screen and glimpse a Persian man brushing a Chinese poem onto a woman's back. Not with a brush. With his tongue. She's still, breathing slowly, her eyes closed. Her lips moving, barely. You think she's reciting it. With him word by word, a duet written in heat. You don't stop. You don't need to. The message is clear. This city was not built by walls, but by mouths. You turn a corner and nearly walk into a Kashmiri woman arranging peacock feathers into her braid. She glances at you, amused, then gestures upward. "Follow the music," she says, in Mandarin smoother than wine. You obey, always follow the music, especially in the Western Quarter. Because here, Sound is seduction, rhythm is ritual, and every note means something beneath what it says. The room you enter is low lit, heavy with hanging lamps and shadows thick as syrup. Inside, a gathering not formal, not secret, just sacred. A dozen people, seated on cushions. Mixed genders, mixed robes, mixed languages. In the center, a storyteller. Older, male, his beard dyed with henna. His hands alive even when his voice stills. He's spinning a tale not erotic, not overtly, but every line drips with tension. You understand none of the words. And yet, your skin prickles with recognition. His listeners are leaning in, breath slowed. One woman has tears on her cheeks. Another has both hands clenched over her chest. A man nearby is weeping openly. And you feel it, too, the way a story, even in another tongue, slides under your skin and rearranges something you didn't know could move. When the story ends, the room doesn't applaud, it exhales. Then someone young, Chinese, in scholar's robes translates a single line aloud. Just one. He said, "I touched her hair, and in that moment, forgot which country I served." Silence again, because that's the point. This isn't about nations. It's about what people do when their bodies forget the flags they wear. Later, you learn that the storyteller was from Samarkand, that his tale was an epic of loss and reunion, filtered through 5 dialects before it reached this room. That the woman who wept had heard the same story as a child in Bukhara and had forgotten it until tonight. And that the man who cried had just realized his lover didn't speak his language, but had understood him every time. Historians rarely talk about this part of the Tang Dynasty. The linguistic part, the musical part, the deeply personal part, where a Sogdian merchant whispers love in broken Mandarin, and a Chinese concubine replies with a Persian idiom she heard once and never forgot. But these were real people, real relationships. And in bed, language bent, adapted, became music. One preserved letter from a palace concubine to a visiting Arab envoy includes the line, "I cannot say what I feel, so I painted it instead. The ink understands me better than words." Enclosed with the letter, a single stroke of calligraphy, bold and curved, later interpreted by scholars as the word for surrender. Or maybe trust. It depends on the angle, depends on the viewer, depends on the night. And here's your sex story, unexpected and delicious. A Japanese envoy once arrived at court and quickly became infamous for his lack of subtlety. He refused metaphor, rejected poetry, and told a well-known courtesan, "I want you. I don't need to say it pretty." She replied, "Then you'll have to earn me in silence." For 3 nights, he said nothing, touched nothing, just watched. On the 4th night, she blindfolded him and let him touch her through silk. Number. Words, just breath. On the 5th night, she spoke a single phrase in Japanese. "Now you've earned me in my language." They never slept together. That wasn't the point. They'd already met, where it mattered, in the unsaid. So yes, the Silk Road brought spices, ideas, chaos, but it also brought metaphors. New ways of saying, "I want you. I remember. You. I forgive you." In Sanskrit, in Arabic, in gesture, in song. And the people of Chang'an, they absorbed it all. Wove it into their tapestries, their bedrooms, their jokes, their tears. There's a recipe still floating around for an aphrodisiac tea combining rose hips, crushed dates, and wolfberry, reputedly designed by a Syrian healer and perfected by a Chinese concubine who claimed it made men tell the truth for 3 hours. Maybe it worked, maybe it didn't, but the myth persists. Because the real secret wasn't in the ingredients. It was in what they whispered after drinking it. You leave the Silk Road quarter with your head spinning, not from wine, but from the enormity of it all. The sheer intimacy of cross-cultural connection. The audacity of strangers making each other feel known through shared breath and borrowed metaphor. You pause beneath a lamp hung with bells. The wind stirs. The bells tinkle, and you wonder, how many languages can a moan be translated into? You suspect the answer is all of them. It starts with a fan broken. Just a clean, violent snap through the lacquered ribs, one half still trembling in the palm of a woman who won't cry in public. You're standing at a garden party, the kind where everyone smiles too hard and drinks too little, and the air is thick with plum blossoms and performance. You didn't see what caused the break, but you felt it, like thunder under silk. One moment, she was laughing. The next, the fan cracked, and silence swept through the courtyard like a blade. Her partner, once a lover, now something else, stands across from her, frozen in the act of refilling her cup. Wine dribbles onto the stone tiles. No one moves. No one speaks. Not because they're confused, but because they understand. This isn't clumsiness. It's announcement. The end of something. A fracture made public through gesture. Welcome to the art of Tang Dynasty breakups. As nuanced, theatrical, and emotionally choreographed as their courtships, sometimes more. Because in this world, endings weren't hidden, they were staged. You watch as the woman lowers the broken fan onto the table with terrifying calm. Her sleeves barely move, her lips don't quiver, but her eyes? They're on fire. Not rage, not sorrow. Just the kind of clarity that says, I'm done translating myself into someone else's metaphor. Her former lover bows slightly, the way you might acknowledge an opponent in Go before accepting defeat. Then he turns, leaves. No storm, no screams. But the gardens change now. Everyone feels it. The light seems colder. The plum blossoms suddenly smell like dust. This was a public heartbreak. And that means it's already a story. The fan will be collected by a servant. Its halves sent to opposite ends of the city, one to her quarters, one to his. A symbolic division. Like a final period at the end of a very long, very poetic sentence. Because in the Tang world, lovers didn't just fall apart. They composed their separation like a verse. Carefully, bitterly, and yes, beautifully. A shattered fan, an unlit lantern. A poem returned with one line crossed out. These were the tools of romantic endings. No shouting. No spectacle. Just elegant disintegration. There's a term for it, actually, silent thunder. A phrase used in Tang literature to describe those moments when everything changes without. A sound, pillow talk reversed, intimacy unspooling. And often, the objects were the messengers. A robe returned still warm. A comb placed on the wrong side of the bed. A teacup left unwashed. Tang lovers didn't ghost. They curated their exits. You've heard the stories. A scholar who sent his courtesan a painting of a plum tree missing one branch. She replied by composing a poem in which every fourth character spelled leave. They never spoke again. A general whose lover tied a red string to his sword hilt. Before his departure, he cut it off without looking. She burned all his letters and mailed back only the ashes. The scrolls recorded the movements. The rest was inferred. Historians still argue whether Lady Qiao's abrupt departure from court was political exile or a heartbreak so profound she could no longer sleep within earshot of the capital. All we know is that she left behind a single sandal, no note. Just that. Theories abound. A metaphor for unfinished journeys. A symbol of reluctant departure. Or perhaps, and this is the one that haunts you most, a reminder that some people leave without needing both feet to do it. You walk through the garden slowly now, the scene behind you still vibrating in your ribs. You pass another couple whispering beneath a willow. Their hands are not touching, their voices are too measured. You know what's happening. Another ending. A quiet goodbye. They'll finish their tea. One will walk east, the other west. They might kiss, or they might simply say, enough. And no one will cry. Not here. Not now. But someone will write a poem tonight. and someone else will find the ink stains tomorrow. That's how heartbreak moves in the Tang Dynasty. Through ink, through gesture, through scent. And if you think that sounds cold, think again. It's not detachment, it's reverence. Even the endings are sacred. You pause near a table set with sweets, candied lotus, red bean paste, rosewater cakes, and find your sex story of the evening waiting on a napkin. Literally. Someone's scribbled a verse in plum syrup. Your hand once shook for me. Now it steadies the door. It's unsigned, of course. But the flavor of the handwriting, you recognize it. A courtier with a gift for metaphors and an addiction to loss. She once wrote her name into someone's thigh with a paintbrush. Now she writes her heartbreak into desserts. Progress. You take the napkin. Not to keep. Just to remember that even sweetness can carry ache. And here's your fringe tidbit recovered from a scroll buried with a minor concubine, preserved in a lacquer box beside a lock of her hair. It's not a letter. Not a diary, just a list of sounds. His breath. The way he says, wait. Rain against the jade steps. My own laugh when I still believed him. That's all, no context. Just that list. Her eulogy, perhaps. Her inventory of grief. Scholars dismissed it for decades. Too sentimental. Too domestic. But one historian finally called it what it was. The purest form of memory. Sound without dialogue. You pass the broken fan again on your way out. It's still on the table. Someone will clean it soon. Discreetly. But you hope they don't rush. You hope they let it sit there a little longer. Because some breakups deserve to echo. It begins with a scent that doesn't belong. Not incense. Not perfume. Not even the garden's late summer lotus bloom. This is sharper metallic. Perfumed with intent. You catch it as you pass through the eastern corridor of the lesser concubine's quarters. A place lined with mirrors too polished for anyone to pretend they're not being watched. You're not supposed to be here. Which makes it the best place to be. Because this is where the softest knives are sharpened. Where jealousy doesn't whisper, it sings. You stop beneath a paper lantern shaped like a peach and watch a servant carry past a tray with 4 perfume bottles, each nearly identical. Nearly. One of them is poisoned. Not lethally. That would be too obvious. Too final. This isn't about death. It's about discredit. About waking up with your skin blotched or your voice hoarse just before you're summoned for a night with the Emperor. About being just slightly off. Just forgettable enough. Welcome to the world of slander on a scented breeze. In the Tang Dynasty, love wasn't the battlefield. Reputation was. And no war was fought more subtly, more seductively, than the war between women who had shared the same bed, sometimes on the same night. You follow the servant at a distance. She's trained well, no wasted steps, no backward glances, but you notice the minute tremble in her left hand as she turns a corner. She's carrying more than perfume. She's carrying intent. In a palace this vast, where a single glance can be misinterpreted into exile, words are never the only weapons. Rumor is, so are scent, silk, a misplaced letter, or a glance held just a little too long across a banquet table. Pillow talk in this realm isn't romantic. It's weaponized. You've heard the stories. The concubine who left behind a poem not written by her plagiarized, whispered into the emperor's ear as original only to be exposed by another lover mid-massage. The exposure, not public. Much worse, whispered during foreplay. Didn't. I read that poem in the spring pavilion last week. He froze. She smiled. The plagiarist was never summoned again. Reputation death by insinuation. Even your scent could betray you. One empress, furious at a rival, reportedly commissioned a rare musk from the western regions and had it applied to her own sheets, then claimed the rival had tried to seduce her husband while wearing her scent. It didn't matter that it wasn't true. The emperor recognized the smell. The rival was sent to a Buddhist nunnery the next day. Historians still argue whether she actually converted or was just hiding in the library writing angry poems. Either way, she never returned. You round the corner and arrive at a dressing chamber where 3 women sit, faces serene, postures perfect, but eyes like razors. They're not talking, they're listening. To each other's silences, to the way powder is applied, to the slight wince when a hairpin is adjusted too tightly. They all know what's happening. One of them is falling. She just doesn't know it yet. You watch as one of the women lifts a small wooden box and removes a folded slip of parchment, a note. She reads it, smiles, folds it again, places it in her sleeve. But not before the others have seen the corner of a very recognizable seal. That smile wasn't pleasure. It was a loaded gun. You don't need to know what the letter said. You know what it means. She has something, or someone, and she's going to use it. This is how slander begins in the Tang Dynasty. Not with accusations, with implications, with fans held too high, with laughter that stops too soon, with compliments that carry just a drop of venom. Your robe is so daring. I could never wear something so noticeable. Or, did you hear? Lady Lin was seen reading during the ritual. Perhaps she finds the gods boring. These comments aren't jokes. They're bait. And the ones who survive? They don't defend. They escalate. You step into the chamber fully now, and the temperature changes. You're not a threat. Not yet. But you're a witness. And that makes you dangerous. One of the women, the youngest, offers you tea. You sip. It's warm. Sweet? Poisoned? Probably not. But diluted? Perhaps. You smile at her and say, "You have ink on your sleeve." A small thing. Harmless. But her eyes widen. The others take note. Maybe she's been writing. Maybe about someone else. The doubt has been planted. You just whispered without moving your mouth. This is the language of Tang sabotage. A fan left open on a pillow. A jade comb with another woman's initials. A sigh at the wrong moment. Even silence, when applied with precision, could ruin someone's week. And here's your sex story, slanderous by nature. A eunuch once reported that he overheard 2 women discussing the emperor's preferences in bed. One said he liked to be bitten. The other said he whimpered when touched behind the ears. Neither had proof, but the rumor reached the emperor. He summoned neither of them. Instead, he changed bedrooms, and pillows, and lovers. Both women were dismissed within a week, not for dishonesty, for indiscretion. Because in this court, the worst sin was making something private too public. Even if it was true, especially if it was true. You finish your tea, bow, leave the chamber. As you walk down the corridor, you hear soft laughter behind you. Not unkind, not mocking, just aware you've been marked. You said something without saying anything, which means now you're part of the game, whether you meant to be or not. As you turn a corner, you catch your reflection in a bronze mirror. You look calm, polished, but there's something in your eyes, something sharp. Not fear, not suspicion, readiness, because now you understand. In the Tang Palace, love is not just a feeling. It's a narrative. And the moment someone controls your narrative, they control your fate. So you'd better start writing it yourself. One glance, one word, one carefully folded note at a time. It begins with a whisper. Not in a bedroom this time, but in the shade of a cypress grove near the palace's inner temple. 2 eunuchs, pretending to sweep leaves that never seem to fall. One leans in, says something low, and the other straightens, still sweeping, but slower now. Their rhythm has changed. You catch the movement as you pass. You don't slow, but you're listening. Everyone is. Because today's whisper is different. It's not about who wore what or who was seen slipping through which corridor after dusk. It's about a name, a child, a shift in the imperial bloodline. And it all started in a bed, years ago, with the wrong person at the right time. This is no longer gossip. This is legacy. You keep walking, heart ticking faster. You've heard rumors like this before: illegitimate children, swapped scrolls, hidden marriages between shadows and silence. Most of them die in the mouths that carry them, but some sprout. And when they do, they change dynasties. Welcome to the final layer of Tang Pillow Talk: succession. Power, not just in the moment of seduction, but in the aftershock. In the consequences of pleasure that echo across generations. A lover's murmur, once dismissed, now returns with teeth. You enter the hall of ancestral offerings. It's empty, cool, heavy with incense. You're not here to pray. You're here to remember, because this hall has seen everything. Not through eyes, but through what lingers. Perfume from a robe abandoned mid-argument. Ink on a scroll written during late-night panic. A hairpin buried behind a tapestry. Artifacts of secrets. Too important to vanish completely. You sit, and you start tracing names in your mind: emperors, consorts, courtiers, threading their stories back to the beds they lay in, and the people they whispered to. One emperor, late in the dynasty, was said to make every major decision. Only after sex. He trusted no one but his lover, a former musician with a voice like a thundercloud. She never held a title, never signed a document, but her words shaped edicts. You can see it in the patterns. Every trade policy she discussed became law within a week. She died young. Fever, they said. But some claim it was poison slipped by a jealous cousin of the empress. Her last words, supposedly, were, "Then, let him dream of no one." He didn't. Never touched another. His reign unraveled quietly. No scandal, just exhaustion. He stopped trusting anyone. And an emperor without trust is just a man in expensive clothes. Another case. A concubine once whispered into the emperor's ear, "What if your brother's son had your eyes?" A joke, probably. But the child was born with a mole above his left brow, the same as the emperor's. People noticed. Too many people. The concubine disappeared. The child was sent to a monastery. 30 years later, he returned as a warlord. Not for revenge, for acknowledgement. He wanted nothing more than his name spoken publicly, officially once. It never was. But that didn't stop his army. Because you see, whispers can become weapons if they survive long enough. And the Tang elite knew this. That's why they used coded language even in bed. Lovers weren't just soft companions. They were liabilities, allies, informants, or threats. There's a reason why the phrase "pillow tiger" emerged: a lover whose bite came after the kiss, whose power only emerged after the room was dark and the doors locked. You hear footsteps, now deliberate, echoing. A woman enters, robed in mourning colors, but not grieving. Not exactly. She's older, elegant, eyes like cooled steel. You know her by reputation. A former consort, retired, but influential. They say she still receives letters written in calligraphy only she and the emperor understand. She sits beside you without invitation, doesn't look at you, just says, "He asked for me last night." You nod. "What did you tell him?" "That I forgave him." "Did you mean it?" "I meant for him to believe it. That's all." That's the conversation. She stands. Leaves. The silence she leaves behind is absolute. You exhale, slow, because you know what just happened. The emperor is dying, and she just reminded him of everything he owes and to whom. Somewhere right now, scribes are preparing the succession scrolls. Officials are debating heirs. And one quiet phrase, whispered between sheets 20 years ago, is about to decide the next 50 years. You think back to the documents you've seen, the ones hidden behind tapestries and temple walls, lists of children who never made it to, the records, names of mothers who never got more than a whisper of recognition. They exist, not in the archives, but in stories, in the way a eunuch tightens his grip on a scroll, in the way an empress avoids looking at a certain guard, in the way a palace maid writes poetry about a boy who resembles a man she once served. And that brings us to your sex story short, brutal, true. A prince fell in love with his bodyguard. Everyone knew. No one said a word. When the bodyguard was found dead, an accident involving a horse that didn't exist, the prince never spoke of him again. But 2 years later, during a diplomatic banquet, the prince recited a poem about moonlight reflecting off armor. The court applauded. Only the empress wept. She had recognized the guard's name hidden in the first character of each line. Pillow talk encoded in public verse. The prince died without children, but his poems are still recited. And the guard? Buried in the imperial mausoleum under a false name, but with a full military title. You rise now, slowly, and return to your quarters, not to rest. To write, because someone needs to remember this. Not the facts. The truth. The truth that in the Tang Dynasty, history didn't just happen in war rooms or temples. It happened in bed. It began in breath and ended in lineage. And tonight, as you light the lamp and dip your brush into ink, you realize something chillingly clear. The most important thing ever whispered in the Tang Empire might not have been whispered yet. You step into a chamber bathed in moonlight, filtered through jade green screens, and the air shifts. It's thick with expectation, electric, nearly audible. A silk curtain parts silently, revealing a pair of lovers reclining among perfumed cushions. Neither moves. Neither breathes more than necessary. And between them lies a folded scroll, its edges crinkled but untouched, waiting to be read. This is the last whisper, not in tone, but in consequence. Because everything you've seen leads here. Pillow talk, you've learned, isn't theater, it's prophecy. One phrase, voiced at the wrong moment or the right moment, can ripple across generations. Above them, the painted ceiling shows lotus blossoms unfolding at night, an image of birth, of secrets revealed. You feel it in your bones. This room was built to hold stories like this. Behind you, a servant bows but remains silent, watching, absorbing. You realize they'll carry the memory tonight. Even if the walls forget, the man shifts first. He reaches for the scroll. Reads asterisk. He who names the child names the dynasty. And here it is, the confession, the inheritance, the prophecy. This is no longer intimacy, it's succession. He hands it to the woman. She unfolds it fully, pausing as if tasting every character. So we speak it, she says, voice soft. And he knows he has no choice. You watch as she stands and steps closer, placing the scroll at the man's fingertips. Her eyes glisten, not with desire, but resolve. She breathes against his ear. Say the name tonight. He hesitates. The silk slippers on the floor shift. Their solace brush briefly, as a question, as consent. Then he folds the scroll and kisses her wrist. Not romance, ritual, that's when you step forward. You bow low. History begins now, you whisper. The lovers look up. Recognition crosses their faces. Your eyes know the weight. They nod. The man exhales. Says the name, the hidden child's name, royal though unacknowledged, into the silence. And in that moment, the dynasty realigns. Not through sword or scroll, but through breath. You turn to leave, and the woman calls softly, "Don't forget us." You pause, say nothing. But your heart answers, "I remember." Outside, the palace is still. But inside, centuries of secrets shift. Slippers untangle from each other. Curtains settle. The scroll lies folded once more. No one will ever write it down again. But you will carry it. You walk back through the corridors, past servants lighting lanterns, concubines smoothing gowns, eunuchs straightening tiles. They all breathe with you now. You are both outsider and courier, and with each step you realize the story isn't over. Someone somewhere will hear the name in a whisper. Someone will speak it, and the dynasty will bend. Here's your fringe tidbit, a final legend. A child born in secrecy once carved the phrase, "Mother's name is Wind," on the underside of a jade hairpin. It wasn't discovered until the 12th century by a tomb looter who thought it was a forgery. It wasn't. The symbol was real. The dynasty name Wind revealed. But no one knows whose jade it was, or whose skin it touched. That's the power of the final whisper. It doesn't need to be heard to be true. It just needs to survive. You reach your quarters at dawn. The air smells faintly of sandalwood and ink. You take the slippers you've spent weeks trailing, though. They're no longer yours, and place them gently beside your bed. The embroidery is faint. Lotus, phoenix, an open-mouth moon. A message, a farewell. A seed. Your fingers trace one of the ribbons. Then you brush them against the silk pillows. Every thread hums with legacy. And as you lay down, you breathe out the name you heard, softly, reverently. The rest of the night stretches before you, not for sleep, but memory. You won't write this down. Not yet. Because words like whispers are powerful only when you decide when to release them. You've followed me through silk and shadowed halls, through fan language, erotic manuscripts, clandestine salons, cursed tears, and the final naming. That journey was never about grand battles or tomb chamber treasures. It was about quiet power, about the weight carried not in armies, but in breaths placed on pillows at midnight. Now I want you to close your eyes and feel the world shift. Imagine slippers side by side on cold stone floors, untouched scrolls holding more truth than any history book. Fans snap not from anger, but meaning. Breathe deeply. Let the last echo of silk in the dark cradle you. Rest in the understanding that intimacy, spoken or not, remakes kingdoms. Some whispers are small, others reshape dynasties. But all of them, every sly joke in the library, every scented lie in the perfumed chamber, every ritual of aligned breathing mattered. You've been let into a lost art. Now you're free to carry it in your mind as you drift off. Maybe tonight you dream of silk sliding across stone. Maybe you whisper a name you're not supposed to remember. Maybe you feel something ancient in your bones. This is gratitude for listening. This is testament to the power tucked beneath pillows. Let the candle gutter, let the sheets cool. You've heard more than most. Sleep now, dream now. And if you ever wake at midnight wondering who's whispering beside, you know it may be history itself. End of script. Sweet dreams.